spin bowling masterclass is coming up. Obviously, I'm Tom Flowers, ECB Level 4 coach, TFCC head coach. Today we've got a fantastic guest that's joining us for these sessions. We welcome Andrew Salter from Glamorgan County Cricket Club, off-spin bowler, and we're delighted to welcome him here today over at the Brooklyn Cricket Centre. So Salts, welcome.
Yeah, thanks for having me. Look forward to showing some things that I've picked up over the last couple of years, really, working with a whole range of coaches, and they've all brought different things to my game, so look forward to sharing some tips and tricks.
Perfect. Well, today, guys, we're going to look at basics of off-spin bowling. So we're going to begin with what a typical training session will look like for Salts here. We're going to look through a couple of typical drills that he'd do and how he goes about preparing in his training sessions for his match practices. Thank you. Typical start to a practice session today. How would it look for you?
Well, slightly colder than my normal training session. But yeah, I like to just break the skill down and progress it. So really break it down to throwing the ball out of the hand, getting that seam presentation, standing it up as much as possible. This is a particular drill I did with G Patel quite a lot, where I just chuck the ball, but the aim is to get the wrist in a nice strong position, progress that into then more the natural bowling action, and you'll see how that then progresses into from half the length of the wicket to the full length, and spend as much time as on that required. Some days it's a little bit longer on the wrist because it's not quite there. Other days it feels pretty good and you can progress quite quickly into that full action.
So guys, just to take from that, as Salts says on his game day, a progressive warm-up there, consistent. I'd suggest that he does the same almost every time he practices. However, it's that idea of being aware that he wants to be flexible, and sometimes certain parts of that warm-up might take a bit longer and certain times less. I guess it's when you're comfortable, ready to go.
Yeah, and I've done different things over my career. At some points I was very much arguing about 6 balls like this, 6 balls around the wicket, and it's quite tough to keep with that because sometimes you don't finish on the right delivery or it doesn't feel quite right and you don't want to finish there. So yeah, I think I've just learned to be a little bit more flexible with that preparation.
Mate, that's a great insight. Guys, let's have a look at what the start of Salts' sessions will look like.
So literally just throw it and trying to get that seam as tall as possible. Yep. Try not to cheat and come too much over the top. So still trying to keep relatively with my natural range of motion. But it really challenges my wrist to get in a good position.
Do you find, Salts, that you can even get something out of this from throwing like you said, doesn't have to necessarily be straight on into full bowling?
Yeah, I've never really done this before until my last couple of winters working with Keaton. I felt like it's quite a tough thing to change and modify when you're in your bowling action. But doing it now, breaking it down, just throwing it, you can really feel that wrist in a stronger position, and that does correlate quite nice to when I come into the more full bowling action.
Perfect. And typically, how many would you do? You talked about sets of 6 earlier, but is it more feel?
Yeah. Anywhere between 6 and 12, really. Again, you can get a feel straight away, and like I threw the first couple, you can see because the seam's highlighted with this ball, which isn't a bad thing to do. Probably just come down slight like that, and then the odd one's just creeping up a bit taller. So it really is to stand that seam up tall, not to cheat by coming in too high, but it just really works that wrist. So when you come into bowling, it could just be that little bit of difference, but bowling off-spin, catching the seam and missing it is literally those degrees, so that's what I'm working with here.
Perfect. Great, and then we move on to the next part of your preparation, so what would that look like? Yeah,
similar, we'll stay at the half length, but I'll be bowling my action now from the crease.
Perfect, let's go.
As I warm up that seam, it should start to get a bit taller.
Yeah. One more?
Yeah, one more. Starting to get my hips. Hips are a bit better towards the end, so.
And so you really see, guys, from my end there, just watching that from the batter's perspective as such, you can really see that as Salts builds up his practice here, the revs that he's getting on the ball, the shape of that seam coming down, like you said, he's really getting the angle he's looking for. Those who watched the recent test series against India will have seen the analysis of Dom Bess in his wrist position. And I think that's sort of what you're talking about there, being careful you're not almost coming over the ball, a bit like Ashwin can occasionally do, doesn't he? He goes over.
Yeah, I've become a bit of a nerd when I start breaking down other people's actions.
Yeah, it's interesting.
Some off spinners give themselves access, so they slightly more lean back. So I think Bess falls into that category where he gives himself the access to get the hand right forward. I naturally keep myself a bit taller, so that means my arm is a bit lower. So it's just as important for me there to make sure my wrist is in good position, because I can't really cheat and give myself too much access.
Yeah.
But with this drill specifically, I think it's quite, the first couple could be a bit lazy with that hip drive, and I'll start to notice towards the back end, the seam gets better, I get better dip, better revs, action on the ball when I start to get that hip drive coming through. And it's quite tough to do from the crease because you're used to using the momentum to get that drive, where naturally I sometimes can miss that leg drive. I just try and get it all from my arms and my hands. So the progression there towards the back end of that was just, okay, let's get that drive through a little bit better, and then you start to see a bit better action on the ball.
The guys who are watching this, is there any sort of, talk about go-tos as bowlers, batters, whatever it might be. You got any go-tos for working on that hip drive?
It's just a feeling, and normally that's where you finish. So keep assessing your follow through. If I'm bowling the ball and I'm sort of finishing with a half step, that's pretty much how much I'm using that. But if I get it to and I finish with a full step, long stride, that's a good indication that I've driven that back leg.
Perfect. So you don't think, a lot of guys you'll see, especially a lot of coaches and players and younger spinners, you know, all the equipment's out, everything's here. What's your view on that? Are there any bits of coaching equipment you could bring into that, or would you just tend to go by feel and potentially feedback off your coach?
It's tough to say probably where I probably am in my career, where I'm at with my action. I've done stuff with hurdles, I've had alignment tools down to try and get my hips and my shoulders aligned. Really important stuff, but I feel like I've sort of grooved those aspects, and now I can just do these simple drills, which I call simple but can be quite challenging.
Simple if you know what you're doing.
Yeah, and where I can naturally get into a spell where, like as you said, it's happy. I'm happy to sort of say, oh yeah, you know, that's what I do. But those alignment drills, if you need to stick takedown and that's your drill point, do it. Really nail those basics, because as sexy as it looks on TV when guys are bowling these beautiful balls through the gate, you've got to nail the basics.
It's hours now to practice to get that perfect ball, isn't it?
For sure.
So now, where would you go from here? Are you ready to bowl now? Is that what you do?
Yeah, I'd still like to stay at the crease at my end, but I'll get the receiver, the wicketkeeper behind the stubs. Again, this is quite tough because you don't have the momentum. You do have to work a little bit harder to get that shape on the ball and to not undercut it or come underneath it. So something I spend a lot of time doing because I find it challenging myself. But once I get this right from the crease, I feel the progression into a long one up is a bit easier.
Perfect. Should we have a look at that from the crease? What I'll do is, just so you guys watching can see what you're doing with the ball, I'll just stand to the side down there.
Yeah.
Pull back. Is that okay?
Yeah. Okay.
Yeah, it's nice. We've invested quite a bit with the quality of the mat, so I'm pleased you got that feedback. Guys, just from my end, down here, it's really interesting because you can really tell how Salts is getting his wrist positions. He was talking about there in his warm-up drills. I'm really noticing that now and seeing that progression with this third set of drills here.
Maybe just use that last one rather than my half body down there as well.
And how many of these would you do, Salts, usually? Just feel?
Yeah, I can spend quite a lot of time on this, even within those 4 or 5 I call them one how I want to. So it is a challenging drill, but yeah, you can do a whole session staying at the crease. So yeah, probably again at least 6 to 12 balls.
6 to 12.
Yeah.
With that, would you ever introduce batters or target areas to hit as visual cues or anything like that?
So at the moment with our small groups, batsmen would be coming into the net after this sort of period, so I wouldn't have the cones down because I know I'm going to be bowling against batsmen, so I can gauge my length there. But if it was just myself, now the progression would be run up, get some targets down, so I can measure the length. So yeah, I'd use it when batsmen aren't involved, but if I know I'm going to be going into a net with a bit more game competition, like, I'll be able to gauge my length by how they play. So.
I guess that's good experience as well, because you see some bowlers and they prefer to have the visual cue of the batter standing there, the shadow batting. Some bowlers like that coned off length, but I guess again personal preference and perhaps where you are in your development of your career, like you say.
Yeah, I've always preferred bowling to batsmen. Never sort of shied away from that in nets because that's my best gauge on length. Coaches have probably told me to try and bowl more at cones because I've always just naturally said got my length better from a wicket-keeper batsman. That's what feels a bit more natural to me, but yeah, you can't go away that you just got to put some hours into grooving that rhythm.
Absolutely, great point to finish on there about rhythm salts. So I think, guys, from that little clip you've seen today, little masterclass sort of preparation for spin bowling, I hope you managed to see a little bit of Salts' prep, how he goes about his business, how he talks about stripping things back a little bit rather than going straight into bowling in the net, and actually the value of building something up in your skill set and how that then translates into hopefully a better practice session or a game maybe that you're going into. So thanks a lot, Salts, today.
Pleasure.